June 22, 1941. 3:15 a.m. The Bug River frontier. Mist hangs low over the water, clinging to reeds and rotting wooden piers. On the western bank, engines idle in tight formation, hundreds of them. The vibration travels through damp soil and into boot soles. Panzer crews sit inside steel hulls, headphones pressed tight, breath-fogging optics. Infantrymen of Heinz Guderian's 19 Panzer Corps crouch in tall grass, fingers hooked around Carabiner 98K triggers, waiting for the sky to split. Then it does. The first artillery volley cracks open the darkness. Muzzle flashes ripple like a lightning storm along the German line. Shells arc eastward in flaming trails, descending toward Soviet bunkers and barracks just beyond the river. A second later, the horizon erupts, earth and timber thrown skyward, signal wires snapping, men jolted awake inside concrete pillboxes. Above them, the engines change pitch. The Luftwaffe comes low and fast, Heinkel He-111s and Junkers Ju-88s droning east, Messerschmitt Bf-109s cutting through the thinning mist. Their target is not London, not Paris. There will be no blitz over Britain in this war. No battle of the Atlantic strangling supply lines. No desert war in North Africa draining divisions and fuel. In this version of 1941, there is only one front. Only the Soviet Union. Adolf Hitler stands miles away at the Wolfschanz in East Prussia, staring at a wall map that stretches nearly the length of the room. Red pins mark Soviet divisions. Blue pins, far more than in our timeline, cluster along the frontier. There are no garrisons in Norway. No Afrika Korps under Erwin Rommel in Libya. No Luftwaffe squadrons tied down defending the Ruhr from British bombers. The entire war machine faces east. When the order is given, Guderian doesn't hesitate. Vorwärts, assault boats slide into the river. Engineers paddle hard, bullets snapping into the water around them as stunned Soviet border guards scramble to man machine guns. A young Oberleutnant named Karl Fischer feels the cold spray hit his face as his boat grinds into mud on the eastern bank. He leaps out, MP-40 raised, shouting his platoon forward. Behind him, the 1st Panzers roll onto hastily assembled pontoon bridges. Panzer III and IV tanks grind eastward, tracks chewing planks slick with river water. Fuel trucks follow in tight columns. There is no need to divert supply convoys to France. No fear of Royal Navy interdiction. Every liter of gasoline, every spare part, every artillery shell has been stockpiled for this single blow. By sunrise, Soviet border regiments are collapsing. But the scale is different now. In our history, Operation Barbarossa launched with roughly 3 million Axis troops. Here, it is closer to 4.5 million. Entire formations that once guarded the Atlantic Wall now push through Belarus. Luftflotte squadrons that once battled the RAF now sweep the skies from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The sky belongs to Germany on day one. Near Brest-Litovsk, Soviet General Dmitry Pavlov struggles to reach Moscow through shattered communication lines. Reports flood in, bridges seized intact, airfields bombed before aircraft can take off, armored spearheads already 30 kilometers deep. The Red Air Force loses hundreds of planes before wheels leave the ground. And yet, even in chaos, something holds. Soviet artillery batteries, pre-sighted and camouflaged, begin firing blind through smoke. Katyusha rockets scream overhead for the first time that morning, their eerie wail cutting through the thunder of German guns. A Panzer IV erupts in flame when a 76mm shell punches through its side armor. Infantry scatter, diving into shell holes. This is not France. This land is vast, endless wheat fields broken by marsh and forest. Roads are narrow, often unpaved. Supply columns stretch for miles, vulnerable despite their numbers. The further east the Germans drive, the more the map seems to expand. By nightfall, Army Group Center has advanced nearly 50 kilometers. Minsk is already trembling under the weight of encirclement. Prisoners stumble west in stunned columns, thousands of them. German officers exchange tight smiles. Without Britain harassing their industry, without American lend-lease propping up Soviet logistics, how long can this giant truly stand? But in the Kremlin, Joseph Stalin does not flee. He listens in silence as reports stack up like corpses. His generals expect rage. Instead, they see calculation. He orders full mobilization. Factories east of the Urals begin preparing for evacuation immediately. Earlier, faster than in the timeline you know. Because this time, there is no Western Front to split Germany's strength later. There will be no D-Day. If the Soviet Union falls, there is no second chance. On the frontier, as darkness returns, Karl Fischer sits against the smoking hull of a disabled tank. The air smells of oil and burned wheat. Somewhere in the distance, Soviet sappers detonate a rail line, cutting another artery the Germans hope to use. The invasion has begun with overwhelming force, greater than history ever saw. But the land is swallowing sound, smoke, and men alike. And the question lingers in the drifting ash. With all of Germany's might aimed east, is it enough? July 10, 1941. 4:40 p.m. west of Smolensk. The dust never settles. It hangs in the air in thick curtains behind the advancing columns of Army Group Center. Engines roar day and night. Tracks grind soil into powder. The horizon trembles constantly from artillery concussion. What was once open farmland is now a maze of burning villages and shattered tree lines. Oberleutnant Karl Fischer hasn't removed his boots in 9 days. His platoon rides atop Panzer IVs as they crest a low ridge overlooking a highway clogged with Soviet transport, trucks, horse-drawn carts, fuel bozers abandoned mid-escape. Stukas dive through the smoky sky, sirens screaming as bombs punch craters into retreating formations. The road becomes a slaughter corridor. But this time, the German spearheads are thicker, heavier. Entire infantry corps that once would have guarded France now march behind the armor. Additional motorized divisions seal encirclements faster than Soviet commanders can react. The Luftwaffe flies nearly uncontested. There are no RAF raids forcing squadrons back west. No need to defend Berlin from British night bombers. Fuel reserves, untouched by campaigns in North Africa, flow directly into Guderian's tanks. Smolensk becomes the first true test. Soviet General Georgy Zhukov arrives by train 2 days before the encirclement tightens. He steps onto the platform amid smoke and distant detonations, boots striking cracked concrete. His orders are blunt. Hold the Dnieper line at all costs. He surveys the map inside a dimly lit command post. German pincers are closing faster than expected. In our history, Soviet counterattacks at Smolensk bought precious time. Here, German reinforcements plug every breach with ruthless efficiency. On July 16th, the ring snaps shut. 3 Soviet armies are trapped west of the city. From the German perspective, it feels like destiny unfolding. Columns of prisoners stretch across fields in staggering numbers, hundreds of thousands. Wehrmacht photographers snap images of endless ranks of Red Army soldiers, faces hollow, uniforms torn. At Wolfschanz, Adolf Hitler studies reports with growing conviction. His generals argue over the next objective. Historically, there was debate. Divert south to Kiev? Drive north toward Leningrad? Push directly for Moscow? But now, with surplus divisions available and supply lines momentarily stable, the argument changes. There is no British air threat forcing caution. No Mediterranean campaign siphoning armor. The rail network behind the front has been converted faster thanks to additional engineering battalions. More trucks, more fuel, more men. Hitler makes his decision. Moscow first. The order cuts through the command structure like a blade. By early August, fresh panzer divisions surge east again, barely pausing after Smolensk. The distance to Moscow shrinks on the map, less than 400 kilometers now. But the land begins to fight back. The rains come early, heavy, suffocating rain. The roads, never meant for mechanized armies of this scale, turn to black rivers of mud. Trucks sink axle deep. Horses collapse in harness. Recovery vehicles strain as cables snap under tension. Supply columns slow to a crawl. Karl Fischer watches a fuel truck tip sideways into a ditch, its driver cursing as mud swallows the wheels. He helps push, boots disappearing into the muck. Every kilometer now costs hours. And the Soviets adapt. Zhukov orders layered defensive belts. Anti-tank ditches snake across likely avenues of advance. New T-34 tanks, fast, sloped armor, wide tracks perfect for mud, begin appearing in greater numbers. German 37mm anti-tank guns struggle to penetrate them. Crews stare in disbelief as shells bounce off angled steel. In one violent clash near Yelnya, Fischer's platoon witnesses its first full T-34 assault. The Soviet tanks emerge from fog like phantoms, engines growling deep and steady. One Panzer III explodes under a direct hit. Another is rammed and overturned. The myth of effortless victory fractures. Despite superior numbers, despite the singular focus eastward, German momentum begins to strain against physics. Distance, weather, resistance. Still, the advance continues. By mid-September, forward reconnaissance elements can almost taste Moscow's outer defensive ring. Refugees stream east on foot, carrying bundles and children. Smoke columns mark villages deliberately torched by retreating Soviet units. In the Kremlin, Joseph Stalin refuses evacuation. He addresses the nation over radio, voice steady, promising that Moscow will not fall. Entire factories are dismantled and shipped east beyond the Urals at a pace even German intelligence underestimates. Because while Germany has concentrated its might, the Soviet Union has concentrated its will. On September 30th, 1941, the order is issued. Operation Typhoon begins. The final drive toward Moscow. Karl Fischer tightens the strap on his helmet as engines rev once more. The autumn air carries the first whisper of cold. Ahead lies the Soviet capital. Behind them stretches a supply line over 1,000 kilometers long. The question is no longer whether Germany can win battles. It is whether it can outrun winter. October 15, 1941. 6:20 a.m. Mozhaevsk defensive line, 110 kilometers west of Moscow. The first snow falls like ash. It melts on warm engine grills and freezes again before dripping. Frost clings to rifle barrels. Breath clouds instantly in the brittle air. The ground that was mud 2 weeks ago has hardened into iron. Operation Typhoon slams forward at full force. 3 panzer groups drive in converging arcs, north and south of the main highway to Moscow, seeking another massive encirclement. In this timeline, their strength is undeniable. Fresh infantry divisions that never guarded Normandy now march shoulder to shoulder through the forests west of the capital. Additional motorized units tighten flanks that once would have been thin. The Luftwaffe dominates the sky. Without British bombers over the Ruhr, aircraft production has remained uninterrupted. Squadrons rotate east in waves. Soviet supply depots burn under relentless bombardment. Rail junctions vanish in firestorms. The Red Air Force fights desperately but bleeds heavily. Karl Fischer stands atop his Panzer IV as it crests a frozen ridge. Through binoculars, he sees it for the first time, a faint silhouette on the horizon. Moscow, factory smokestacks, church domes, the distant glint of the Moskva River. Men around him cheer, a raw, hoarse sound carried away by the wind. But the city does not collapse. Instead, it transforms. Inside Moscow, civilians dig anti-tank trenches with numb hands. University students carry ammunition crates. Workers assemble submachine guns in metro tunnels converted into factories. NKVD units position machine guns at key intersections. Loudspeakers broadcast defiant music across Red Square. And on October 19th, martial law is declared. General Georgy Zhukov, pulled from the Leningrad sector earlier because no forces were needed to guard against a non-existent Western Allied landing, takes direct command of the capital's defense. Fresh Siberian divisions arrive sooner than in our timeline. Intelligence confirms Japan will not attack in the Far East, freeing tens of thousands of winter-hardened troops. They disembark wearing white camouflage smocks. They carry Mosin-Nagant rifles and PPSH-41 submachine guns. They are ready for cold. The first German assault on the Mozhaevsk line crashes into layered artillery and anti-tank belts. 88mm guns knock out Soviet armor at long range, but for every T-34 destroyed, another appears from tree lines. German infantry advances house by house in shattered villages, only to be counterattacked at night by Siberian troops who move silently through snow. Then the temperature drops. -10 degrees Celsius. -20 degrees Celsius. Engines refuse to start. Lubricants thicken. Machine gun bolts freeze mid-cycle. German soldiers wrap rags around boots that were never designed for Russian winter. Supply trucks arrive late or not at all. The scale of the offensive had been larger than history, but so is the front. Fuel must travel from depots in Poland across 1,000 kilometers of strained rail lines. Even with no Atlantic War draining resources, even with no Africa campaign, distance is the silent enemy. On November 27th, advanced reconnaissance units reach the outskirts of Khimki, less than 20 kilometers from the Kremlin. Through field glasses, an officer claims he can see the spires of the city center. Hitler demands the final push. At Wolfschanz, he leans over maps, convinced victory is within grasp. He refuses withdrawal. Orders are explicit. No step back. Karl Fischer's platoon advances along a frozen road lined with burned-out vehicles. Snow squeaks under boots. The silence is suffocating until it isn't. A Soviet artillery barrage erupts without warning. Shells detonate among the Panzers. One tank lifts off the ground before slamming back down in flames. Siberian infantry charge through smoke, white uniforms blending with snowdrifts. Close quarters fighting erupts. Grenades tossed through shattered windows, submachine gun bursts in stairwells, bayonets crossing in icy trenches. The German advance stalls. On December 5, 1941, before dawn, Zhukov launches a massive counteroffensive. Entire fresh armies surge forward along a broad front north and south of Moscow. Ski battalions slip behind German lines. T-34s spearhead thrusts into overextended positions. Exhausted Wehrmacht units, many at half strength, are struck by coordinated assaults they cannot absorb. Karl Fischer watches in disbelief as Soviet armor pushes west through terrain the Germans thought secured. A comrade beside him whispers, "They're not finished. They were never finished." The temperature falls to -30 degrees Celsius. Frostbite claims fingers and toes. Rifles jam. Horses freeze in harness overnight. German divisions that once drove like a hammer now fight merely to hold ground. And yet, this is not a complete collapse. Because Germany had committed everything east from the beginning, reserves still exist. Reinforcements begin arriving from depots in Germany that, in another timeline, would have been defending against British bombers. The retreat stabilizes by late December, roughly 150 kilometers west of Moscow. The capital stands. The Wehrmacht bleeds, but it survives. Winter has not destroyed the invasion. It has stopped it. And for the first time since June 22nd, the war in the east looks less like a sprint, and more like a war of endurance. June 28, 1942. 4:10 a.m. south of Kursk. Dawn bleeds red across the steppe. The snow is long gone. In its place, tall summer grass bending under the weight of armored columns stretching to the horizon. Engines idle in disciplined silence. Tank commanders stand half-exposed from turrets, binoculars scanning east. The Wehrmacht did not break in winter. It adapted. Over the spring of 1942, rail lines were repaired at ruthless speed. Additional locomotives, never diverted to supply campaigns in France or Norway, pushed east in constant rotation. Factories in the Ruhr, untouched by Allied bombing, have increased output. New Panzer IVs with long-barreled 75mm guns roll off assembly lines in higher numbers. More 88mm anti-tank guns. More half-tracks. More ammunition. There is no North African front consuming fuel. No Atlantic Wall demanding concrete and manpower. Everything points toward the Soviet Union. But the Red Army has changed too. Across the front, Soviet rifle divisions dig deep defensive belts. Anti-tank mines lace the soil. Entire brigades trained specifically to hunt armor at close range with anti-tank rifles and satchel charges. T-34 production, relocated safely beyond the Urals months earlier, flows steadily. The war is no longer about shock. It is about capacity. At the southern sector headquarters, German planners study oil maps. The Caucasus fields, Maykop, Grozny, Baku, glow like prizes on the wall. Fuel shortages had strained operations during the Moscow push. If Germany controls Soviet oil, the war tips permanently. Hitler approves the plan. A massive southern offensive toward the Volga and the Caucasus. Army Group South, reinforced beyond its historical strength, begins its advance. Karl Fischer, now promoted to Hauptmann, commands a company of Panzer IVs upgraded with improved armor skirts. He feels the difference in discipline. The men are leaner, harder. Winter stripped away illusions. The initial breakthrough is devastating. Soviet front lines buckle under concentrated artillery. Luftwaffe bombers pound river crossings along the Don. Entire Soviet armies are forced into rapid retreat to avoid encirclement. By late July, German units approach the Volga. and one city rises into focus: Stalingrad. In our history, the battle for Stalingrad became a turning point. Here, it begins differently, because Germany has more infantry available. Instead of splitting forces between Stalingrad and Deep Caucasus thrusts as thinly as before, additional divisions secure flanks more effectively. Romanian and Hungarian allied units are reinforced by German reserves that historically never existed in sufficient numbers. When the first shells fall on Stalingrad in August 1942, they fall under a sky dominated by the Luftwaffe. Bombardment reduces entire districts to skeletal frames of brick and steel. The Volga churns with debris and burning fuel slicks. Karl Fischer's company advances into the northern industrial district in September. The air tastes of concrete dust and cordite. Factories loom like shattered fortresses. Soviet snipers haunt the ruins. Street fighting consumes days, then weeks. Every building becomes a strong point. Every stairwell a kill zone. The Germans push closer to the Volga than ever before. In several sectors, Soviet defenders are pinned to a narrow strip of riverbank. From German observation posts, the Volga's eastern shore is visible through smoke. But the Soviet command has prepared. Zhukov and Vasilevsky study the map beyond the city itself. The German advance, though reinforced, has created a deep southern bulge. Supply lines stretch hundreds of kilometers across vulnerable steppe. And the Red Army has rebuilt more than German intelligence fully grasps. On November 19, 1942, before dawn, Soviet artillery opens fire, not inside Stalingrad, but against the flanks north and south of the city. Operation Uranus begins. Waves of Soviet armor surge into Axis positions guarding the outer perimeter. But this time, German reinforcements are thicker. Anti-tank guns are more numerous. Panzer reserves are closer. The Soviet breakthrough still punches deep, but not as effortlessly. Karl Fischer hears distant artillery thunder behind his lines. At first, it sounds like routine counter-battery fire. Then the radio crackles with urgency. Enemy armor. Northwest sector. Multiple divisions. The encirclement forms, but slower. Bloodier. German counterattacks slam into Soviet spearheads repeatedly. Panzer units redeploy faster than in history. Several Soviet tank corps are mauled in the first days. Yet the Red Army does not stop. More formations pour into the breach. By November 25, the ring tightens around Stalingrad, but it encloses fewer German troops than in our timeline. Significant armored elements manage to withdraw west before the pocket fully seals. Still, tens of thousands remain trapped. Winter approaches again. Karl Fischer's company is ordered west to assist in relief operations. As his tanks roll across frozen steppe under a pale sun, he realizes something fundamental. Even with all of Germany focused east, even with more divisions, more planes, more guns, the Soviet Union is not collapsing. It is absorbing. The war has become a furnace, consuming men and steel faster than either side imagined. And somewhere beyond the Volga, factories still hum. July 5, 1943, 3:30 a.m. south of Kursk. The earth shakes before the sun rises. Thousands of German guns open fire in perfect sequence, a rolling wall of detonations stretching across the horizon. Muzzle flashes illuminate low clouds in stuttering bursts of orange and white. The ground trembles beneath boots and tank tracks alike. Hauptmann Karl Fischer stands inside the turret of his new Panzer V Panther, its long 75mm gun aimed into darkness. The vehicle smells of oil, metal, and sweat. Around him, engines idle in disciplined formation, Tiger I heavy tanks, assault guns, mechanized infantry packed tight behind armored shields. This is Germany's answer. After Stalingrad bled both sides white, the Wehrmacht rebuilt with everything it had. Factories in the Reich have worked without interruption. No Allied bombing raids to disrupt production, no second front siphoning reserves. Panther and Tiger tanks roll out in greater numbers than history ever saw in mid-1943. Ammunition stockpiles are deeper. Replacement crews better trained. The objective is simple. Destroy the Soviet bulge at Kursk. Regain initiative. Break the Red Army's momentum before it grows unstoppable. But the Soviets have been waiting. Zhukov did not rush into reckless offensives after Stalingrad. Instead, Soviet engineers transformed the Kursk salient into a fortress. Minefields layered 6, 7 belts deep. Anti-tank guns camouflaged in tree lines. trenches zigzagging across wheat fields. Reserve tank armies positioned far behind the lines, ready to counterstrike. German artillery pounds forward positions for hours. Then the armor advances. Fischer's Panther lurches ahead as dawn finally spills across the steppe. Almost immediately, the first explosion lifts a Panzer IV to his left, tracks blown apart by a buried mine. Smoke pours from its hull as crew scramble out under machine gun fire. The Panthers press on. Their guns speak first, long-range shots that punch through Soviet T-34s at distances earlier German tanks could not manage. Several Soviet vehicles erupt in flame before they can close range. For a moment, it feels like technological superiority might decide the day. Then the second defensive belt begins firing. Hidden anti-tank guns open up in coordinated volleys. Shells ricochet off Panthers, but others punch through weaker side armor. Tigers return fire with devastating accuracy. The battlefield becomes a churning storm of dust, smoke, and burning fuel. The scale is beyond anything Fischer has witnessed. Hundreds of tanks clash across open fields near Prokhorovka. Soviet T-34s charge aggressively, closing distance to negate German range advantage. Some ram outright into German armor, trading steel for steel at point-blank range. Infantry cling to tank hulls, throwing grenades into vision ports. Overhead, the Luftwaffe and Soviet air forces duel relentlessly. Stukas dive onto Soviet armor columns. L-2 Sturmovix roar low, rockets streaking into German formations. By nightfall, the battlefield is a graveyard of twisted metal. And still, neither side breaks. Germany's concentrated strength has achieved deeper penetration than in our history. Several Soviet defensive belts collapse under sustained pressure. Yet each kilometer gained costs dozens of tanks, hundreds of men. Worse, the Red Army has reserves. On July 12th, massive Soviet counteroffensives ignite north and south of Kursk. Entire fresh tank armies surge forward against German flanks. Unlike 1941 or even 1942, these units are well-coordinated, experienced, and heavily equipped. Karl Fischer watches through his gun sight as wave after wave of T-34s crest a ridge under artillery cover. He fires. One erupts. Fires again. Another burns. But there are too many. German logistics, though stronger than in our timeline, are reaching mathematical limits. Fuel convoys stretch thin across thousands of kilometers. Replacement parts wear out faster than they can arrive. Even untouched by Western bombing, German industry cannot match the sheer industrial relocation and manpower reserves of the Soviet Union fighting for survival on its own soil. On July 18th, orders come down. The offensive is halted. Not because of an Allied landing in Sicily. Not because of a crisis in Italy. There is no second front. It stops because it cannot continue. The Wehrmacht has struck with maximum force and failed to achieve decisive breakthrough. The initiative shifts. By August, Soviet offensives hammer German lines across the front. Orel falls. Belgorod follows. German divisions conduct fighting withdrawals, disciplined but exhausted. Fischer stands beside his battered Panther near a railway line west of Kharkov. The sky glows red from distant artillery flashes. He studies a map illuminated by flashlight. For 2 years, Germany has committed everything east. No Atlantic Wall. No North Africa. No bombing campaign over Berlin. All strength. All focus. And still, the Red Army advances. The war has transformed from invasion into survival. And the question now is no longer whether Germany can defeat the Soviet Union, but whether it can avoid being crushed by it. January 14, 1944, 6:05 a.m. west of Kiev. The ground is frozen solid again. But this winter feels different. There is no optimism in the ranks. No talk of final offensives. The German line stretches thin across thousands of kilometers, a scar carved across Eastern Europe. Snow blows sideways across trenches reinforced with logs and scrap metal. Artillery flashes pulse endlessly along the horizon like a second sunrise. Hauptmann Karl Fischer no longer commands Panthers. He commands what remains. His company, once 22 tanks strong, now fields 8 operational vehicles. Spare parts arrive irregularly. Crews are younger, replacements drawn from classes rushed through training. They are brave but green. Across the line, the Red Army is unrecognizable from 1941. Entire fronts are mechanized. Soviet tank armies maneuver with confidence and coordination that mirrors, even surpasses, early German blitzkrieg doctrine. Artillery concentrations dwarf anything the Wehrmacht can assemble. The Soviets have mastered operational depth, breaking through at one point, then exploiting ruthlessly into the rear. And crucially, they are fighting on soil that is becoming their own again. In this timeline, Germany lasted longer in the east than history recorded. Moscow never fell. Stalingrad bled both sides. Kursk failed to break the Red Army. But without a Western front, without Allied bombers reducing German cities to rubble, the war became a pure industrial duel. And in that duel, geography decided everything. The Soviet Union's factories beyond the Urals have operated untouched for years. American Lend-Lease is smaller without Britain acting as conduit, but it still exists through Arctic routes and the Pacific. Trucks, food, raw materials trickle in steadily enough to matter. Germany, despite its focus, cannot expand its resource base indefinitely. The Caucasus oil fields were never fully secured. Romanian fields at Ploiești strain under demand. Synthetic fuel plants run at maximum capacity, but fuel shortages quietly grow worse year by year. On March 3, 1944, Soviet artillery opens a barrage west of Kiev that seems endless. For 3 hours, shells rain down in layered waves, high explosive, smoke, fragmentation. When it stops, Soviet armor rolls forward in disciplined columns. Fischer's Panthers fire until barrels glow faintly red. One T-34 explodes. Another follows. But Soviet engineers bridge anti-tank ditches under fire. Infantry swarm through gaps. The line bends. Then it snaps. German divisions conduct fighting withdrawals toward Poland. Villages once taken in 1941 are passed again, this time in retreat. Refugee columns clog roads westward. The air smells of smoke and thawing earth. By late 1944, the Red Army stands on the Vistula. There is still no D-Day in France. No Allied armies pushing from the west. The war is decided entirely in the east. Hitler refuses negotiation. He orders fortress cities. He demands counterattacks that consume the last operational reserves. The Wehrmacht obeys, but the scale is overwhelming. On January 12, 1945, the Vistula-Oder offensive begins. Soviet forces smash through defensive lines with crushing artillery density. Within weeks, they reach the Oder River, less than 70 kilometers from Berlin. Karl Fischer, now gaunt and hollow-eyed, commands a defensive position near Kustrin. His Panther is dug in as a static gun. Fuel is rationed to near nothing. Ammunition is counted shell by shell. He hears the distant thunder of Soviet guns every night. There are no American troops crossing the Rhine. No British columns entering Hamburg. Only the Red Army. On April 16, 1945, the final assault begins. Soviet forces smash through defensive lines with crushing artillery density. Within weeks, they reach the Oder River, less than 70 kilometers from Berlin. Karl Fischer, now gaunt and hollow-eyed, commands a defensive position near Kustrin. His Panther is dug in as a static gun. Fuel is rationed to near nothing. Ammunition is counted shell by shell. He hears the distant thunder of Soviet guns every night. There are no American troops crossing the Rhine. No British columns entering Hamburg. Only the Red Army. On April 16, 1945, the final assault begins. The Silo Heights tremble under one of the largest artillery bombardments in history. Searchlights pierce pre-dawn fog, silhouetting advancing Soviet infantry. Tanks grind forward relentlessly. Fischer's last Panther fires until its ammunition racks are empty. A Soviet shell slams into the turret ring, jamming rotation. Smoke fills the compartment. He orders evacuation. By April 28, Soviet troops fight street by street in Berlin. Without a Western front dividing Germany's conquerors, there is no race to the Elbe. No division of occupation zones negotiated under battlefield pressure. Berlin falls entirely to the Red Army. On May 2, 1945, organized resistance in the city collapses. But the war does not end immediately. Scattered German formations continue resisting in Bavaria, in Austria, in pockets across Eastern Europe. It takes until early 1946 for full capitulation to be enforced across all remaining strongholds. When silence finally settles, Europe looks different. There is no divided Germany. No Iron Curtain slicing across a continent half-liberated by Western allies. Instead, Soviet forces occupy the entirety of Germany. Eastern Europe is not a buffer, it is a continuous sphere stretching to the Rhine. The war that began on June 22, 1941 as a singular, concentrated blow has ended in a singular outcome. Germany, even when fighting only the Soviet Union, even when committing every division, every aircraft, every factory to the east, could not overcome scale, depth, and industrial relocation beyond reach. Karl Fischer stands among the ruins of Berlin in winter 1946, now a prisoner of war. Snow drifts through shattered windows. The Reich that once surged east with unstoppable confidence lies buried under brick and ash. The question that began this war echoes in the silence. Was fighting only the Soviet Union enough? The answer lies in the ruins around him. It was not.